There's fast, there's furious, and then there's Formula One when everything goes completely wrong. Over the years, F1 has delivered some of the most mind-bending, chaotic, and downright terrifying crashes motorsport has ever seen. From cars splitting in half and bursting into flames, to championship dreams vanishing in the blink of an eye. These aren't just moments in racing history. They're full-blown legends etched into the memory of fans forever. Today, it's time to revisit 10 of the most jaw-dropping, heart-stopping crashes that left fans stunned, teams scrambling, and drivers walking away from wrecks that looked anything but survivable. Some of these accidents ended careers, some sparked safety revolutions, and a few even showed just how tough and determined an F1 driver really is. And through every twist, turn, and fiery spin, one thing becomes crystal clear. F1 isn't just fast cars on tracks, it's survival at 200 miles an hour. So buckle up, because these are the top 10 insane F1 crashes ever seen. 10. Vitaly Petrov's steering wheel detachment crash. This one didn't make headlines the way others did, but it easily deserves a spot on this list, purely for how shockingly strange and dangerous it was. Vitaly Petrov was flying through the circuit, fighting for position, when suddenly, chaos broke loose. A misjudged turn, an oversteer, and Petrov's car slammed into the barriers with brutal force. The impact wasn't just violent, and it was enough to shake the entire front end of his car apart. But here's where things got really wild. In the middle of the crash, his steering wheel literally came off. That's right. Not after the crash, not once he was parked, but during the collision, while the car was still mid-wreck. Now, for anyone who doesn't watch F1 regularly, that might sound like a minor detail. But in Formula One, the steering wheel isn't just for turning left or right. It controls everything. Gear shifts, fuel mapping, communication with the team, brake balance, engine modes. It's basically a spaceship's control panel. And to lose it, while flying toward a barrier at full speed, is terrifying beyond words. It was one of those rare moments where even commentators were left speechless. Fortunately, Petrov climbed out of the wreckage shaken, but okay, no serious injuries. But watching that wheel bounce around the cockpit while the car came apart was the kind of visual you don't forget. Moments like this are why Formula One's safety innovations are so critical. Because one small failure can become a life-threatening disaster in half a second. And as wild as this was, the next crash on the list proved that even a tire, just one tire, can destroy everything a driver worked for. 9. Kimi Räikkönen's tire explosion, European Grand Prix. When people talk about heartbreaks in Formula One, they usually bring up missed podiums or bad pit strategies. But what happened to Kimi Räikkönen at the European Grand Prix was far worse. It was the kind of crash that didn't just cost him the win. It nearly cost him everything. Räikkönen was leading, not just by a little. He had it locked down. The car was working, the pace was strong, and it looked like a clean run to victory. But then came the moment every driver dreads. A flat spot on the tire. It happened during a lockup. The front right wheel, skidding under braking, got chewed up and uneven. Now, most drivers would box immediately, but Räikkönen, he kept going. He and the McLaren team decided to risk it, believing they could hold on just a little longer. But each lap made things worse. The vibrations from the damaged tire were rattling the suspension, shaking the chassis, and throwing off the car's balance. By the time the final lap came, the car was practically undrivable. And then, the tire finally gave out. With just a few corners to go before the checkered flag, the front suspension collapsed under the stress. Räikkönen was thrown off track and straight into the barriers. From P1 to did not finish in seconds. The image of him sitting in the broken car, helmet still on, silent. That said it all. No anger, no outburst, just raw disbelief. A perfect race, undone by a gamble and a tire that couldn't hold on. It was one of the most heartbreaking ends to a Grand Prix, and a brutal reminder that in F1, even near perfection isn't always enough. 8. Australia GP, multi-car wipeout, 8 car retirements. The Australian Grand Prix is usually where the season kicks off. New liveries, fresh rivalries, and high expectations. But on this day, expectations were thrown straight out the window in under a minute. Right off the line, it became clear something was wrong. The pack surged forward, engines screaming. And then, in a blink, absolute chaos. One car tagged another, that one spun into a third, and within seconds it turned into a metallic tornado of shattered wings, broken suspensions, and smoke. 8 cars were out. 8. Not because of technical failures or bad strategy, just one giant, clumsy, domino-style disaster. For the teams involved, it wasn't just a logistical nightmare. It was a blow to the gut. Months of preparation, testing, and engineering, gone before the first lap could even settle. For fans, it was both stunning and sad. Nobody wants to see that much carnage that early, and yet it was impossible to look away. Marshals rushed to clean the track, the safety car came out, and the race was suddenly down by a quarter of its grid. And as the remaining cars lined up behind the safety car, no one really knew what the race would look like anymore. Championship contenders wiped out. Midfielders suddenly in podium territory. This crash flipped the race upside down and created one of the most unpredictable GPs in years. But that wasn't the only time a race fell apart in dramatic fashion, because at the Brazilian Grand Prix, things got just as messy. And one of F1's biggest names got caught right in the middle. 7. Mark Webber and Fernando Alonso. Brazil Grand Prix crash. The energy, the passion, the noise. It's always one of the most electric races on the calendar. But in this case, that electricity sparked absolute disaster. Mark Webber was pushing hard. A slight misjudgment, a bit too much curb, or maybe just a freak moment of bad luck, and boom! The Red Bull spun, hit the barriers, and disintegrated into a mess of carbon fiber and flying debris. But the worst part, Webber's crash wasn't the end of it. Fernando Alonso, one of the sharpest and most experienced drivers in the field, was charging right behind him. But with all the smoke, debris, and confusion, he didn't see the yellow flags in time. And just like that, another brutal impact. 2 heavyweights taken out in the same breath. The crash was a chilling example of how quickly things can go wrong, even for the best. It wasn't about rookie mistakes or pushing too hard. This was just one of those cruel sequences where one crash leads straight into another. Webber's wreck made the track a danger zone, and Alonso became the unintended victim. Miraculously, both drivers walked away, but the silence from the grandstands and pit wall spoke volumes. That crash didn't just affect 2 drivers, it shifted the entire rhythm of the race. If there's any silver lining, it's that F1 cars are built like tanks. But not even a tank could have saved what happened next. A double crash so chaotic, they had to restart the race. Twice. 6. Austrian Grand Prix. Multi-car crashes and 2 red flags. This one's a case study in how everything can go wrong. Not once, but twice, before a single proper lap even gets done. The Austrian Grand Prix was supposed to be clean. Dry weather, blue skies, and a relatively straightforward grid. But when the lights went out, it all fell apart. Within seconds of the race starting, cars began colliding. Whether it was cold tires, narrow gaps, or just nerves, the field collapsed into a wreck of carbon fiber and tangled wheels. The red flag came out immediately, stopping the race cold. Everyone took a breather. Marshals cleared the wreckage. Drivers reset mentally. And after what felt like forever, the grid lined up again for a full restart. But guess what? It happened again. Right at the restart, Nigel Mansell's Williams got off to a painfully slow launch. The cars behind had no time to react, and one after another, they piled in. 12 cars were involved in a single chain reaction crash. That's right, 12. Another red flag. More delays, more broken dreams. It took over 2 hours before the race could properly restart for a 3rd time. And in one of the most ironic twists of all, Nigel Mansell, the man whose stalled start triggered the chaos, ended up winning the entire race. You can't make this stuff up. But if this sounds crazy, the next crash was more than just a race ruiner. It nearly ended a career, and it began with a simple misstep from one of the most iconic names in motorsport history. There are crashes in Formula One that make you wince, others make you gasp. But then there's Suzuka, 2014, an incident that left the whole world silent. This wasn't just a racing accident, this was a wake-up call, a haunting reminder of just how dangerous the sport can be, even in an era obsessed with safety. The day itself was already against the drivers. Typhoon Fanfone had dumped heavy rain over the circuit, and visibility was horrible. Everyone knew this race shouldn't have been run in those conditions, but it went ahead. On lap 43, Adrian Sutil lost control of his Sauber at the Dunlop curve and crashed into the barriers. Marshals rushed to the scene with a tractor crane to recover the car. Just a lap later, Bianchi's Marussia skidded off at the exact same spot, but instead of hitting the barrier, it slammed directly into the recovery vehicle. The impact was devastating. Bianchi suffered a diffuse axonal injury, one of the most severe forms of brain trauma. It didn't look dramatic from the outside. There was no fiery explosion or car splitting in two, but the consequences were fatal. He remained in a coma for 9 months before passing away in July 2015. It was the first driver death in a Formula One race since Ayrton Senna in 1994. What really stings is how avoidable this was. The conditions were horrendous. A recovery vehicle was on track, uncovered. And despite the safety car being an option, the race director chose to let the action continue. It was a domino effect of decisions gone wrong. In the aftermath, F1 introduced the virtual safety car, a system that forces all drivers to slow to a specific delta time, even if there's no physical car in front of them. It was too late to save Jules, but it could save countless others. And beyond the rules and safety systems, Suzuka 2014 also changed something deeper. For fans and drivers alike, it reminded everyone that even the best trained athletes in the most advanced machines in the world are still vulnerable. The sport had become so safe that death seemed impossible. Jules Bianchi's crash shattered that illusion. If there's one crash that looked like a literal explosion straight out of an action movie, it's this. Bahrain, 2020. Romain Grosjean's Haas car ripped in half and burst into flames within seconds. For 28 gut-wrenching seconds, the world held its breath, not knowing whether they just witnessed a fatality or a miracle in the making. The race had barely started. On lap 1, Grosjean made a sharp move to the right to avoid another car, but in doing so, he clipped Daniil Kvyat's AlphaTauri. What followed was pure chaos. Grosjean's car veered off at 137 miles per hour and smashed into a steel barrier. The force of the impact was measured at 67 G. That's enough to flatten almost anything. The car split in two, the survival cell on one side, the rear engine assembly on the other, and then came the fireball. But here's where modern F1 safety proved its worth. The Halo device, controversial when it was introduced, saved Grosjean's head from hitting the barrier. The fireproof race suit bought him critical seconds, and perhaps most importantly, the quick reactions of the medical team, especially Dr. Ian Roberts and the driver of the medical car, Alan van der Merwe, ensured help arrived within moments. When Grosjean emerged from the flames, it felt like a resurrection. His gloves were scorched, his hands badly burned, but he was alive, walking, talking, breathing. What followed was a flood of tributes, not just to Grosjean's courage, but to the engineers, designers, medics, and safety officials who've pushed the sport forward. Because let's be honest, a crash like that even a decade earlier might have ended very differently. The barrier he hit was replaced overnight. The FIA conducted a full investigation, resulting in 22 safety recommendations, including updates to fuel tank protection and barrier design. But more than anything else, this crash reminded the world that miracles can happen in motorsport, and that the fine line between life and death can sometimes be measured in millimeters of titanium and milliseconds of decision-making. 3. Felipe Massa's spring tragedy, 2009 Hungarian Grand Prix. Qualifying sessions usually have a rhythm. Cars flying in and out of corners, engineers murmuring in headsets, and the crowd waiting for a record-breaking lap. But during the 2009 Hungarian Grand Prix qualifying, all of that stopped. Because what happened to Felipe Massa that day was nothing short of horrifying. Massa was hurtling down the track when a rogue spring, yes, a single spring, came loose from Rubens Barrichello's car ahead. And in a moment that sent chills through the motorsport world, that spring turned into a bullet. It bounced unpredictably, then smashed straight into Massa's helmet, right above his left eye. At those speeds, it was like being hit by a cannonball. The impact fractured his skull and knocked him unconscious immediately. But here's what's terrifying. His foot stayed pinned on the throttle. So even while unconscious, his car continued at full tilt, off track, through the runoff zone, and finally into the barriers. It was a sickening crash. Silence fell across the paddock. Medics rushed to the scene, and Massa was quickly airlifted to a hospital where he was placed in a medically induced coma. He survived. But he wasn't the same. Though he made a heroic return the next season, many believed that moment ended the Felipe Massa, who once nearly became world champion. The incident also sparked a complete overhaul in helmet safety, leading to new, stricter standards and the eventual development of tech like the halo and additional head padding. It's haunting to think that such a small part, something as minor as a spring, could change a man's life forever. And here's something that often gets overlooked. After the crash, track marshals found Massa's visor cracked but still intact. That one piece of polycarbonate had stopped the spring from going just millimeters lower and possibly killing him. Engineers later calculated that if the angle of impact had been even 5 degrees different, Massa likely wouldn't have made it. To this day, drivers reference that crash in helmet design meetings. Even Lewis Hamilton once said, "That spring changed everything." Massa's accident didn't just alter one career, it changed the safety culture of an entire sport. Now, every time a driver steps into the cockpit, part of that legacy rides with them. 2. Robert Kubica's monster crash, 2007 Canadian Grand Prix. The circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal is known for its high speeds and low forgiveness. But in 2007, it was also the site of one of the most violent F1 crashes ever caught on camera, starring none other than Robert Kubica. While chasing down Jarno Trulli, Kubica got just a little too close. The result? Chaos. He clipped the back of Trulli's car, hit a bump in the grass, and lost control completely. What followed was a 180-mile-per-hour obliteration. His car slammed into the concrete barrier, bounced across the track, flew into the opposite wall, then tumbled end over end before finally stopping in a crumpled mess of carbon fiber. Debris everywhere. The chassis looked like it had been folded in half. Commentators were silent. Marshals sprinted toward the wreck. When they reached the cockpit, Kubica was unconscious. But here's the miracle. Within moments, he came to. The crash looked like it should have killed him, but he walked away with only a sprained ankle and a mild concussion. That's it. No broken bones, no internal damage, just pure resilience in a cockpit built like a fortress. And get this, when Kubica woke up, he asked if he could race in the next Grand Prix. The man had just defied physics and was still hungry for more. The crash led to major questions around track safety, and it became a poster moment for the importance of cockpit integrity. If Kubica's survival doesn't convince you that F1 safety tech borders on science fiction, nothing will. In the weeks that followed, the F1 paddock couldn't stop talking about it. Engineers dissected the footage frame by frame. Safety officials rewrote sections of the rulebook. Even rival teams openly praised BMW Sauber's survival cell design. Kubica's crash became a reference point in every future safety briefing. The data pulled from his black box, recording deceleration forces, angles of impact, and structural deformation, went straight into the next generation of car design. And it wasn't just the car that saved him. His hands device, helmet, and the shock-absorbing foam inside the cockpit all worked in perfect harmony. It was a brutal real-world test of F1's best technology, and it passed. Spectators who witnessed it live said they didn't breathe for 30 seconds. One marshal described it as watching a plane crash without wings. Kubica himself would later say the crash changed how he approached racing. He became more analytical, more focused, but no less fearless. That wreck, in a strange way, cemented his legend. Luciano Burti's career-ending wreck. 2001 Belgian Grand Prix. Spa-Francorchamps, fast, legendary, dangerous. And in 2001, it almost claimed a driver's career, if not his life. Luciano Burti was battling Eddie Irvine for position when things went wrong. Fast. The two touched, and Burti's Prost went straight off track at nearly 150 miles per hour. But this wasn't a normal off. Burti's car plowed under the tire barrier, disappearing completely under layers of rubber and metal. It wasn't just a crash, it was a burial. The impact was so severe that it knocked Burti unconscious. Marshals had to dig through the tire wall just to reach him. His helmet was destroyed. The G-forces involved were beyond brutal. He suffered facial fractures and a severe concussion. Burti was never quite the same. Though he eventually recovered, that crash marked the end of his Formula One career. What made this accident especially disturbing was how invisible it made the driver. For a moment, nobody could even see where he'd gone, and that scared everyone. Spa had always been dangerous, but this was a different level. The incident brought major scrutiny to the safety of tire barriers and runoff zones, and over time, tracks around the world redesigned their impact zones to prevent such a terrifying entrapment from ever happening again. Luciano may not have made a legendary name on the track, but his crash became a turning point, one that changed how F1 protects its own, especially when the barriers are no longer enough. In that moment, Spa didn't feel like a racetrack. It felt like a trap. The silence after the crash was chilling. No engine sounds, no crowd reaction, just stunned confusion. Commentators didn't know what to say because they didn't know where he was. It felt like the circuit had swallowed him whole. Burti had disappeared from sight, and that made the fear real. Even seasoned marshals hesitated. How do you save a man you can't even find? The haunting image of his shattered helmet became a symbol of both danger and survival. It reminded everyone, Formula One may be high-tech, but nature and physics still write the rules. His crash wasn't just an incident, it was a warning that safety is never finished, that progress must be relentless, that behind every helmet is a human life, and behind every barrier, a breaking point. And that sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to change everything. It's moments like these that remind everyone watching just how brutal, unpredictable, and dangerous Formula One can be. Behind every heroic overtake and record-breaking lap, there's the constant shadow of risk. The 10 crashes we just explored aren't just dramatic footage. They're chilling reminders of how close these drivers come to catastrophe every single time they step into that cockpit. But even in the face of devastating impacts, fireballs, flips, and fences torn apart, what stands out most is the resilience of the drivers, the safety teams, and the sport itself. From Romain Grosjean walking out of a fireball to Alonso being launched like a missile and still racing the next weekend, it's not just skill, it's something beyond physical. It's the unshakable mindset that defines every F1 driver. Today, the crashes are fewer and the outcomes far less tragic, thanks to evolving tech, regulations, and the lessons carved into history by these terrifying moments. But if F1 has taught the world anything, it's this: danger can never be engineered out completely. And maybe that's part of what keeps fans on the edge of their seats. Because every time the lights go out, anything can happen. If you made it this far, hit that like button if your heart rate spiked at least once during this countdown. Subscribe for more insane F1 moments, behind-the-scenes drama, and the untold stories that make motorsport legendary. And don't forget to drop your pick for the wildest F1 crash ever in the comments below. We're watching.